Thanks everyone for coming. A lot of familiar faces and some new faces. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name's Angela Kwan. I'm a resident at Haymarket HQ and also on the advisory board here. I'm running a startup here, and I'm also very passionate about Asia. I've worked in China before I came back to Australia, and really excited to have William here. Before we go into the questions, I'll just talk to you about a little bit about the format for tonight. So I've got some questions for William. It'll be a kind of interactive Q&A for about half an hour, and then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. So please have your questions ready at around 7 o'clock, and then we'll be more mingling afterwards. Before we start, just a quick show of hands so we can gauge the crowd and kind of the topic areas here. How many people are working on a startup in the audience? How many from the investor community? We have some. Excellent. And how many kind of corporates or interest in Asia generally? Great. So helpful to know. So William is already part of the Haymarket HQ community. If you are tuning to our podcast, our Hutong Ventures podcast, he was featured there. So if you haven't heard that podcast, I encourage you to check it out. And William also was quoted extensively in the AFR article yesterday, if people caught that. So we'll be discussing a little bit about that AFR article and his comments about how Australian startups can make it to Asia as part of our Q&A. But I thought, William, I wanted to start with a bit of a background about yourself and your kind of personal journey, how you ended up from banking, Deutsche Bank and other investment banks to ending up in China and getting into the startup game.
Okay, maybe the short version?
Yes.
So I've been doing tech investment now 22 years. First 11 as an equity research analyst, where I started off in Taiwan as an English editor, actually fixing local analyst reports, trying to explain Taiwan tech companies to the world. So I spent a lot of my career trying to explain Asia and Asian tech companies to global investors. So I don't have any real skills. Mostly my job is to sell shit and help people raise money and some strategy, and then connect people. So I did a couple of years in Taiwan. Started my career in Taiwan, although I'm based from the U.S. Then 3 years at Bear Stearns in New York, working for the head of tech research, covering PCs, enterprise hardware, storage, and semis. In the late 90s, and at the top of the market, I covered a space called digital home, connected devices. So can you imagine a device that connects to the internet? I wrote a lot of white papers because there weren't that many devices connected to the internet at the time. Top of the bubble popped. I came back out to Asia with Deutsche Bank, where I started covering what digital home became, which is Wi-Fi hubs and routers. 2003 started covering China. The writing was on the wall. Taiwan was basically dying, and I wanted to reposition definitely in China. So I started covering ZTE, UT Starcom, and I took Huawei on their first global roadshow. They decided not to go public again. Then when the China internet sort of boom started to happen, I jumped on that, because in the US you are what you cover. So I started covering China internet around 2004, launched coverage 2005, and the total market cap of all the companies in China and the internet space then was about $3 billion in value. In the next 2 years it hit about $18 billion, and now it's like 1.2, 1.3 trillion. I covered mostly all the internet companies. I spent 2 years of my life preparing Alibaba for their first IPO. Got to hang out with Jack Ma. Well, we'll mostly have Jack Ma sell me on Alibaba version 1.0, the B2B. Took a company public, or I spent another year of my life on something called Kingsoft, which spun out Cheetah Mobile. But mostly I was a coverage analyst, so top ranked stock picker, and I was one of the top 3 internet analysts in Asia, and that's a good time to quit. So I switched instead of to a hedge fund to VC. My counterpart on the banking side got $50 million from SoftBank. Masayoshi Son wanted to do India, and my banker was like the only Indian he knew, so that gets you $50 million. And we got another 50 from Cisco, and I helped him spend it. Invested would be, we spent it. And so we did a lot of investments. I think we returned most of the money. So we didn't do a second fund because unfortunately my partner's wife got sick and they moved to the US to get treatment, but I switched over to corporate VC after that. So I was one of the 3 founding MDs at Singtel Innovate, which is the corporate VC arm of Singtel Group, and we have an Optus seed where we had it, I don't know whether, or they have it now. Did 4 years there, and my investments there were a lot better. Practice makes perfect. So unfortunately, they don't pay carry. They don't give the investors a profit share. They don't want somebody who is technically a VP level to make more than the CEO. It's a very hierarchical company. So I quit and joined as the 5th partner at SOSV. And we are growth hacking or hacking VC. We invest globally, which most VCs do not do. We go very, very deep by sector: biotech, hardware, food tech, ag tech, and I do cross-border internet. And we invest through accelerators. Been there 3 years now, and we help companies from around the world enter China. We help Chinese companies go global, and then we launched Mox, which is a bit of a mess. But Mox is an accelerator and a startup. So we're growth hacking accelerator because Mox, we have a revenue line, and we can get into Mox later. So it's been a fun journey. I think I've done somewhere in around 140 investments over the last, since 2004 or 5. I finally got one hit. I mean, if you do that many investments and you don't have at least one hit, you're kind of an idiot. I got one hit finally. We got a company out of our batch 8 China accelerator, which if you take their profit and apply a pretty normal PE ratio to it, they're probably worth about $1 billion US. And we're the only outside investor, and the 50K I gave was their only cash that they ever took.
Yeah, wow. So, wow, what a story and a trajectory. So, I guess in terms of SOS, what we're doing now in China Accelerator, when I guess like the evolution of the China internet, it kind of probably started off as something that was not a first in the market. So, can you just explain a little bit about the evolution of the Chinese landscape in terms of startups and venture? Is it something that has just happened in the last 3 years or so, or how would you describe the evolution?
Yeah, so Chinese internet, started in the early 2000s, and you had companies that were sort of copies of their U.S. counterparts. You had the Yahoo of China, you had the eBay of China, you had the Google of China, Baidu, but the things rapidly changed because in the U.S., you do one thing very, very well, and in China, after a company does one thing very well, then they go into everything else. You have a concentration of power in China around Baidu, Baidu to a lesser extent because they've missed mobile, but Tencent and Alibaba, and to some extent the Xiaomi ecosystem that Lei Jun's built. You had first generation entrepreneurs, and they didn't quit. They keep on running their companies and they're growing them into huge, massive companies. The second generation entrepreneurs, they were mostly employees of the first generation companies, and they got VC backing because they were ready-made teams. They were already running a product group within Tencent or within Sina or within Alibaba, and they got funding to pop out and do a startup. And a lot of VCs made a lot of money this way. And then now you're getting third generation and almost like fourth generation entrepreneurs, where it's not enough just to pop out and solve a problem, because most of the low-hanging fruit has already been, most of the basic problems have already been solved in China. And you've got a lot of big companies dominating the space. So now you're seeing investment and starting up in China mirroring a lot more in the US, where deep tech matters a lot more, because unless you have technology that creates a revolution and you change the way people do things, you're not going to be able to have any chance of surviving in the context of a market where Tencent and Alibaba and Baidu and Xiaomi control all the users. the biggest problem in China is user acquisition. So unless you have something that is a quantum leap, you really don't have a choice or a chance. Those are sort of the 3 or 4 stages. Yeah, that's why people are investing in AI these days. It's not, there's a lot of companies leveraging AI to do stuff, but they need to have an unfair advantage. It's not just enough to show up and execute a little bit better than the next person.
Right. I think what would be also helpful is to understand kind of the investor landscape in China. For example, who you're involved with SOSV and China Accelerator. Are there a lot of similar VC funds doing accelerators? Can you explain a little bit about the local investors versus investors like yourself with connection to a global network?
Okay, so I don't have 2016 numbers, but 2015, US VC was about 72 billion, supposedly. Europe was maybe 12.5 billion combined, and China was somewhere between 50 and 60 billion. So there's a lot of money. But there's 2 types of money. There's private money in renminbi, and there's government-backed money. Traditionally, the Chinese government has driven economic growth by building infrastructure, and then real estate, and then giving money to SOEs. Their new thing is we're going to do this one belt, one road, and the knowledge economy. But the other thing is they're dumping tons and tons of money into VCs, like supposedly 250 billion. So you have $100 million funds popping up like mushrooms. They can't give money to international entrepreneurs. They can only give money to locals onshore. You have the private investors who can, before, get money out into US dollar, and they do have the ability to invest in a VIE, like a cross-border structure. But most funds have a lot of government money, and for an international entrepreneur, you can't really get that money. There's quite a lot of it, though. And so then there are the sort of the traditional name brand kind of Silicon Valley type US dollar funds that have been around for 10, 12, 14 years. DCM, IDG / XL, I mean the Banyan guys spun out of them. You have Sequoia, and they most of the time invest dollars. They do have some renminbi, but they are very, very local. They don't really have anything to do with their U.S. counterparts, but they invest in traditional tech type businesses, internet type businesses, and they are sort of the third set. Then the fourth set is there's a bunch of local angels and international angels. The local angels, there are many of them, and the international angels, there's like 20. There's not that many international angels. So there's about 5 pots of money, most of which are not accessible to many of you.
Right, so it seems like there is quite a bit of money splashing around, a lot of interest in the startup community. So how do you and SOSV and China Accelerator kind of differentiate yourself, and what's kind of your niche in terms of this startup profile and kind of themes that you focus on?
Yeah, so I'm not Chinese. I mean, I'm half Chinese, but I'm not actually of China. So anytime I ever invested in a local Chinese company, it all turned to shit. That's not my area. So you gotta focus on what you're good at. I'm a cross-border person. So we can take something, our niche is helping companies that have some sort of unfair advantage, usually related to something on the international side. Health, because Chinese people think that Chinese health system sucks. Education, because Chinese people generally think that Chinese education system sucks. AI, because most of the Chinese AI experts don't live in China. Cross-border commerce, because a lot of foreign brands don't trust Chinese people, and we play on that to some extent. And then there's one more area that I'm missing. Oh, fintech, because in a lot of areas the Chinese financial system is a bit of a mess. So those are the areas where an international entrepreneur might have an ability to compete in China. And and we do also actually some travel too, because Chinese people like traveling outside of China.
And can you just talk a little bit about MOX? And so this is separate to China Accelerator. I understand it's actually based in Taipei. So how does that fit in, the theme of MOX, and does it have synergies with China Accelerator and SOSV?
Yeah, so the synergies are happening more and more. So we invest globally. We have 7 accelerators. So IndieBio in San Francisco, Rebel Bio in Cork, Ireland for biotech, FoodX in New York for food tech, ag tech. We have Hacks in Shenzhen for hardware, and Hacks Growth for later stage hardware companies going B2C. But China Accelerator is, and MOX, our focus is helping our companies acquire users without spending money. We invest globally and help companies go to Asia, as opposed to like 500 who invest globally, generally speaking, and they help companies go to the US. In fact, we don't really compete with each other. A lot of our mentors are 500 venture partners in Asia. So what MOX is we took a Chinese business model, the Shanghai or sort of Xiaomi type of business model, out of China into Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Middle East, South America, Latin America. So what that model is, you have hardware like smartphones. Actually, we started with feature phones, and you don't make money on the phone. You make money on the services and apps and all the stuff on the phone. And that's the Xiaomi China model, and increasingly internationally, but mostly that's their model in China. So we took that out of China about 4.5, 5 years ago, but without the hardware. So basically what we did is we went to phone distributors in emerging markets, and these are prepaid. So in like India, you have to buy your phone. You go to a phone store, you buy your phone. So we went to these phone stores, and some of them have as many as 10,000 outlets. And we said, hey, you're selling LG, you're selling Samsung, you're selling Lenovo, whatever, but all the low, mid-range, crappy phones, like $50 US to $200 US, you're buying from Chinese factories and putting your own brand on them. And so if you tell that factory to put our Android ROM, our Android fork on the phone, any money we make on that phone, after you sell it, we'll share revenue with you. It's our operating system, basically. It's an Android fork, a ROM. And so that worked pretty well. We signed up over 100 distributors. The issue is that company needed a little help actually running the ecosystem on the phone, because they didn't know lots and lots of startups. So we partnered with that portfolio company of mine, which I invested in my last fund, to create MOX. And MOX is the ecosystem that sits on top of the phone. I have payment, we have advertising, and the key thing here is we're solving what I think is the biggest problem for entrepreneurs in the emerging markets, especially on mobile, which is user acquisition. It does not matter how good your app is. It doesn't matter how much people love it. No one will ever see it unless you raise money. And it doesn't matter how much money you can raise, because the Chinese guys will generally always have more than you, and especially in Southeast Asia and India. So the amount of money you have to spend for one app launch, like one user, is like 20 cents in India. But the amount of lifetime value that you can get from an Indian user will never be 20 cents. So that's why you don't see VCs investing in mobile, especially in the emerging markets. We try and solve that. So what MOX is, yeah, we put a little bit of money in, but nobody ever works with us because of our money. What we do is we give free user acquisition, and now we have 160 million smartphones on MOX. We give free user acquisition and a little bit of money in return for revenue share, which is a bit of a weird thing, but we take revenue share and equity. And it's been 1.5 years, and over the last 3 or 4 months, things are finally starting to work. So it's an accelerator that's a startup, and we go through all the same pain and like heartache and the grind that you guys go through. I mean, this is basically my 3rd startup. I did 2 secretly while I was at SoftBank, and then this is the 3rd one. It's been actually extremely rough. I have gray hair and I don't sleep very well.
Wow. Yeah. So you mentioned there kind of the differences in the markets. So say India versus China. I guess we hear a lot in Australia that even China itself is not one market. Like Shanghai versus another city is very different. So with what you're doing in China, are you focused on Shanghai, or are you kind of across China? And do you see regional differences in your teams or the startups that succeed in different parts?
Okay, so for international companies going into China, we tend to try and do things that are, where the entrepreneur has some sort of unfair advantage, which means that they have something unique. A lot of times that might be, and we're helping with user acquisition. So we tend to deal with like rich people or higher end stuff. We're asset light. We're operations light. We're not doing like an Uber or something that's heavy on operations. We're also not doing something generally that's mass market, because nobody's going to give us $100 or $200 million or $1 billion to go head to head with any of the big guys. So we tend to go very, very unique, niche, oftentimes luxury. So I'll give you an example. We have a company from Singapore, 3 Singaporean women. They speak Chinese but never been to China. And they launched a fashion app where you can buy like clothing. There's a ton of them, right? In Southeast Asia, they're a top 5 fashion app in 3 countries. But they weren't making money for whatever reason. So the one thing that they had that was unique is they work with like Australian independent clothing designers, Korean, Indonesian, Thai. And so these clothes are not available in China. And what we help them do is hack the market, and we figured out how to sell their clothes. And what you do when you're early stage versus what you do when you're late stage is different. So for them, it just turns out that the Korean designers, fashion designers, hang out with the people who make Korean soap operas, dramas. And Korean dramas happen to be very popular. And the drama makers are cheap, and they get the clothes from their designer friends, and then they stick them on the stars. And then, so we mapped what each star was wearing to which designer, to which show, and then we found the fan groups, and then we created content around that. Actually, we were just testing, and then something spiked, and then we tried to figure out why. We figured out why, and we drove from launch, basically in 12 weeks from zero, we're doing about 36,000 US a week in sales with no marketing spend. And then that's just the first step, because that's not scalable and repeatable. But once you've got 36,000 a week in sales, then you can go back and get better deals with the designers, and then you can bring them into the larger channels. And once you're in the larger channels, then you have a little bit more branding power to create your own social channels. So a lot of it's just trying stuff. And our program is based on this very lean startup focus, is trying stuff. Another sort of a weird example is a big data, actually machine learning play, but we're tracking luxury items. We made a stock market kind of charts for luxury items. So we're tracking 140,000 SKUs of like bags and shirts and LVMH and whatever, all the luxury items that you can possibly think of. And we track real-time pricing, new and used, in 19 countries. And so we do content around it, and we can actually track the pricing. So we're selling like 15,000 US dollar Birkin bags from Hermes on WeChat. Nobody figured out how to do that except for us. So it's sort of niche stuff, but there's good money in there. And the funny thing, it's e-commerce, but it's also travel. So if you click, you can buy it, but then we verify it's real, and then we send it, but then you have to pay tax, right? But if you can actually press reserve and fly to New York and buy it. And the price savings will cover your ticket and your hotel. Because a rose gold Submariner Rolex is like $24,000 in Beijing and like $16,000 in New York for the exact same watch, new. So it's a lot of our stuff is we're solving problems, and we just we make money.
Yeah.
But and we have some other companies that are very deep tech, and this one actually has some tech, but we're just really about using tech to solve a problem. We don't fall in love with our tech.
Right. So on that note about kind of creative ways to growth hack, and also industries like luxury, I guess for Australian founders here, as you know, one of the kind of the themes that Australian startups are focusing on now, a lot in hospitality, a lot in kind of luxury, F&B, or in ag products. So want to now transition to your thoughts on the Australian founder, Australian businesses, and how we can take advantage of this wave of growth of the Chinese market and the Chinese startup ecosystem. Your kind of quite controversial AFR misquotes or quotes were that the vast majority of Australian startups do not belong in Southeast Asia or in China kind of as they are. So I want to get your thoughts on how can Australians build something that can work in China, and have you seen some Australian companies, for example, that have gone through your program, or success stories of Australian companies transitioning smoothly to Asia?
Yeah, so it's you have a great press here. Yeah. So the issue is that startups are generally around to solve a problem. And the problems that you have here are often quite different than the problems that you have in China, or that you have in Indonesia, or you have in India. Especially on consumer, but even on businesses. So a lot of people here focus on going to the US because the problems are a lot more similar. Australia to US. I mean, China's mobile first, mobile only. As far as I know, Australia is digital. A lot of people started on the internet on a PC. Most people in China don't have PCs, and actually PC ownership on a total basis is going down. People just don't use them. People don't use things like email in most of these markets. It's all messaging based. So you just have to figure out whether your product or technology or your special sauce solves a Chinese problem or solves an Indonesian problem. And sometimes, like in education, that's the case, and sometimes in travel, it's the case. But enterprise software, for example, is very difficult. Not only do Chinese companies not pay for it, but the problems that they have, the regulations, there's really huge differences. Usually we say like 95, 98, 99. Most companies here don't belong in China, but we are taking companies to China where we think that the solution can solve a Chinese problem. So we have a company called QLC. They provide 6-week remote. We call them internships. I think you guys call them projects. But you get to work for a VC-backed startup or a leading corporate remotely for 6 weeks. Learn what it's like. Learn what startups life is like. Learn about a new career, and you pay for that privilege. And so we have a lot of Chinese using it, because a lot of Chinese, they have resumes that look like deserts. It's like high school, bachelor's degree, master's, PhD. It's like professional students, right? And the issue is, at least in America, I don't know about Australia, but a lot of folks, go through the entire process and come out not being able to give a presentation in English. So, so this particular company allows people to get some work experience and do it from anywhere, and for companies anywhere. Now, the funny thing is that it's very difficult to sell an internship to a student. So what we figured out, and what the company figured out, is that the problem that needs solving is actually the universities. The universities are not providing any type of work experience or career support to the international students, let alone their domestic students. So we signed up like half of Australia. It's an Australian company, but we started with six or seven different universities, and now in the 3 months, I think we signed like 33 universities, and some of these are opening it up to their like 45,000 students because they are getting taken to task by the parents for not providing any sort of work experience or career development or support. So it's not sexy, but it makes a lot of money.
And are you actively recruiting in Australia or on the lookout for?
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
Okay. And anything that, I guess, based on you come here quite frequently, you mentioned like maybe once a year you're involved in recruiting and the selection process. Is there stuff that's exciting you in Australia, or stuff that you think we should be wary about in terms of how you're seeing the ecosystem evolve here?
Okay, so I kind of come in and I leave, and then so I am not at all an expert on Australia at all. So usually my biggest service I can provide is you tell me what you do, and I'll give you my opinion, which could be wrong, about whether it's a fit and for what market it's a fit. But the areas that we focus on where international companies have a role in the mobile first, mobile only markets are like really basic apps that solve very simple problems. For example, we have a company that does wallpapers. Now, I think when you were all children, you actually changed the wallpaper on your phone, on your home screen, you know, the background picture. But nobody really pays attention to it now. But we have people in India and in Indonesia that, you know, their phone is their life, it's their career, it's their lifestyle, it's their boyfriend, girlfriend, it's their work. Everything happens on the phone, and they decorate it. They decorate the outside. You know, my daughter made this funny thing for me, but they really like decorating the inside. So you might not think it's particularly sexy, but we ran the first test with 13,000 users in India, and in 2 weeks, now not all the people came back, but we had 1 million engagements, which is like 70 plus engagements per launch within 2 weeks. And it's not like we had 13,000 on day one. It was over the 2 week period. That's a lot of engagement. So you just have to think about, you know, are you solving a problem for these users? And if you're not, don't go there. The best way to figure it out is to actually go visit, you know, talk to people, and you know, get out of Australia and take a trip, come visit, and not just China, but also other markets. And I think you'll find that you know, you'll be very happily surprised, or hopefully what will happen is, you know, you'll learn a lot, and the best thing sometimes is to understand that you don't belong there. And that's the service that we provide. We say, probably not a good idea.
Before I let the audience ask some questions, I guess I want to kind of go through some kind of myths about doing business in China and startups going to China, or things we hear about in Australia, and get your thoughts on that. So I guess number one is, do you need to speak Chinese to be successful and for example, go to China? Is that language?
No.
And if you don't, like, how do you deal with the fact that most people don't write in English or speak English? And for example, mobile, everything's in Chinese. WeChat is all in Chinese. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's programs that you can use to translate that, but you just, I mean, business is business, and you can get somebody to help you with the language, but we've seen many business people do particularly well without speaking Chinese. Like 2 out of the 3 co-founders in Qunar were foreigners. The CEO did not speak Chinese. He exited a little bit before the IPO, but the eventual exit was $6 billion US. And Fritz didn't really speak. He learned over time, but he's a white dude, China expert, did not speak Chinese, and built one of the leading travel companies in the country. Now he did have one Chinese co-founder, which also helps. Yeah. But they're very data driven, and like for Mox, we're extremely data driven, because when you're going into Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand, we don't speak the local language. So we run one experiment every single day, sometimes 2 if the teams can handle it, and we throw things at the users. And then they talk to us, and they talk to us through the data. So did they click on this button? Did they convert? Did they bounce? Did they spend money? How much money did they spend? Did they come back? We measure everything, but we don't look at everything. But we do measure a lot, and the data is the conversation. And so the problem is that if you're only launching a new update every 2 weeks, that's a really slow conversation. So when you go cross-border, you need to speed things up a bit. You need to be running tests, you know, every day. Otherwise, it's going to take you a year to get anywhere. And the problem is that these markets move very fast.
Another common perception is the rule of law in China and how you should be very careful about your IP, and basically if you're in China, your IP is gone. What are your thoughts on that?
So just pretend that your IP doesn't matter. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Anybody can hack anybody these days. What matters is speed and execution. Now, as we get more and more into deep tech, yes, you can get hacked, but usually it's your people that get hacked. They steal your people. So, yeah, don't put your people out there where people can find them. You don't leave your engineers lying about, because they have more money than you and they'll take them. Okay, so so be careful with your people. Don't leave them lying about. And if you have some piece of tech that other people could easily use, you should modularize it and make sure that no single player has access to everything. So we had one company where the CTO was like, wow, this is a really good idea. And not only did he steal the entire platform, the CTO of the company, he also planted all this crap inside the code before he left to destroy the company's platform, and then he popped over and set up across the street. Yep, that's normal. So yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful and modularize things and make sure that no single person has a complete picture of everything. And you might not want to move all your people into one room. You know, you can keep some in Australia, you can keep some in China. Okay, yeah.
I guess a final one before I throw it to the audience is kind of the role of government as a foreigner. Are there a lot of restrictions on what you can do, how you can move your money about, how you can even stay in China? Is it a tough place to be a founder as a foreigner?
You can do whatever the hell you want when you're small. So don't worry about law, don't worry about anything, just do your business. And once you get bigger, then you have to pay attention to the law. But in the beginning, just do whatever the hell you want. I mean, like most of our employees, they leave the country every month. And we pay them in cash, because they can't get visas. I hire young people, and to get a visa in China, you have to have 2 years of work experience, and these are fresh grads. So yeah, we have an airplane fund, and a weekend trip to Hong Kong or somewhere. So don't worry about the law until you get bigger. Now, once you get bigger, people will use the law to try and kill you. So then you need air cover. So you need, I mean, we do not provide this. Okay, if you're going to be heavy in the China market, it's important to get VCs that understand how that game is played. That's not what we do. We do user acquisition, retention, product market fit, scale, and partnership. Once you get bigger, it's a different skill set and a different set of services that you should be looking for in your investors and your backers and your partners. That's not us. But generally, I pay very little to no attention to the law. Yeah.
Great. On that note, I might throw it out to the audience. Does anyone have some questions?
Okay, quick question. We spent time in Taiwan, and you sort of said the tech scene was sort of dying there.
Well, that was 2002.
Yeah, so after the .com and all that.
Yeah.
So what do you mean, like no money, or nobody was doing anything? Or?
I mean, I'm not. So I left, and so I'm not an expert of what happened. But there's maybe 4 or 5 major problems. I mean, Taiwan kind of missed the internet.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very, very small home market, and Taiwan has a lot of awesome entrepreneurs, and they made great products in Silicon Valley, and they never went back. Okay, so yeah, so they're YouTube co-founder, all these guys, and some women. They left the market, and you need mentorship. You need smart money, not dumb hardware money. I mean, I'm not saying that hardware people are dumb. It's just that trying to get a hardware expert to invest in an internet startup is a bad idea. And in fact, all those guys got ripped off because they put money into their nephew's internet startup and then lost their shirts. So the first issue is a lot of talent, a lot of success. Nobody ever came back. So there's no role models. The second thing is the capital. So there's a lot of hardware money, and they all got ripped off, or not ripped off, but they all lost their money, and they're like, I don't understand this doesn't make any sense to me, I'm never investing again, which is actually a smart decision, but it means that there's no capital, very few capital, very few VCs and angels supporting. The third thing is that a lot of the best people just left the island. You know, if you look regionally, like very many fashion companies, advertising agencies, they're run by Taiwanese women. I mean, as a sort of a demographic group, you know, it's amazing. But those opportunities were in Taiwan, so all those people left. And so it was a bit tough. I mean, these are things I observed from the outside, and I actually know what happened on the inside. And then the other thing is, you know, Taiwan, just culturally, I'm generalizing, obviously, but you know, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to get people to like jump in the swimming pool. Once in the swimming pool, they do very, very well. Some of the best swimmers in the world. But like making that first jump into the pool takes a little bit of doing.
So the risk taking, is it, I guess?
Well, sort of, no, people are willing to take risk. It's just going offshore is something that's less easy for them, as far as I can figure out. So we just try and help give them a nice landing pad. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The fifth thing is a lot of Taiwan entrepreneurs, it's like, I speak Chinese, there's China over there, they speak Chinese, we're kind of both Chinese, and they go to China and they get their butts kicked. So there's, Taiwan is not China and China is not Taiwan, they're culturally different, their background is different, the language is different, the work culture is different. So it's actually, most Taiwan entrepreneurs that go to China have a disadvantage because they think that it's the same culture versus like a foreigner from America or from Australia who understand it's a different culture, and sometimes that holds things back a little bit. So those are like the 5 or 6 points.
Because you hear a lot of stories about like back in the 90s, early 2000s, you know, a lot of factory guys from Taiwan made the move across to the mainland, and they did well. And then hardware did well as well because they were making all the stuff for the US PC guys, and that did well. But then, yeah, like you said, they just missed the internet, like the .coms, and then after that it was like mobile, and it's like, whoa, it's like Taiwan, like they had money, they had smarts and talents, but you know, it's sort of, they just missed it.
Yeah, money doesn't matter. I mean, it's blue there. I don't know what color it is here. China's red, US is green. What you need is the mentorship, the help. The people who have been there, done that, failed, and hopefully succeeded at something. We're a mentorship-driven program. We got 270 mentors. Most of them are my friends. I make them mentors so that they come and hang out with me because I don't have any time to see other people. They were missing that. So we're trying to help with that. We're in Taiwan for a number of reasons. Mostly it's the talent. If you look across Asia, we were just talking about salaries and talent. You can get, I mean, we're not in Taiwan for low-cost labor. We're there for awesome talent. And Taiwan overall is low-cost. And the food's good, people are nice, there's no pollution, there's no traffic, rent's cheap, and it's kind of like in the middle, so you can fly places. So we chose to put it there, Mox there, even though we're focused on Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, South America. Oh, and our partner was there, so that.
Considering that the amount of money that is going through China and available to, like, you know, the startups and companies there, I know this might be a little bit different from the mention that you just made, but quite often a business can be made or broken by the amount of funding they have, and you can bury your competitors by just sheer, almost like a poker game, by burying the amount of investments that you have. Do you see lots of foreign companies fail because of that, and have you seen any foreign companies do kind of like a flip up into China to be able to access that and have a more common, more level playing field?
So most of the international companies can't access that money. So it's difficult. So probably the best example recently is Uber. So Uber is a operations heavy company. There's a lot of offline. They blew through about $2 billion. DD spent a similar amount of money. There was no regulatory issues. It was level playing ground. And Uber had better tech. They weren't local, but they had a lot better tech. Equal amount of money, and it was a war. And Uber actually fought to a draw, which for a foreign company is a win. They turned their $2 billion into $7 billion of DD stock, give or take. And so that's an example of a win. There are not very many examples of a win. So if you're an international company, even the multinationals coming in, the locals have more money. They work harder. So you probably heard about 996, maybe 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, plus no vacation. I mean, we do that as startup people, but in China, everybody does that. And that's just normal work days, right? People take a lot of vacation in the West. Like, a lot. And if you're in China and you don't really like it very much, people need to take vacation because they start to go a little crazy. So we haven't seen too many local companies go into China and then raise money. It doesn't happen as often. They tried it with LinkedIn. So there's something called the LinkedIn model, where LinkedIn China is separate from LinkedIn Global. It has its own board. It raised money locally. The founders and the team of LinkedIn China, the goal was to IPO LinkedIn China separately. They didn't have any LinkedIn Global stock. And they had a board of directors. Now, they were majority owned by LinkedIn, but if the CEO got a message from the Jeff, the CEO of LinkedIn, that he thought was like dumb, he could tell the two VCs that were on the board, hey, can you just tell him that this doesn't make any sense? Now, a lot of companies are copying that, and I think that model generally does make sense. Unfortunately, it didn't work for LinkedIn, because Chinese people don't do business social networks very well. I know I invested in 2 of them, they both failed. But if you're a bigger company going in, you can try for that model, but you need to be like name brand in order to do that. Otherwise, the local VCs probably wouldn't go. And they had awesome, I mean, I'm in a group with the former CEO of LinkedIn China. I mean, he left. He was a local entrepreneur with success and took a whack at it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Mostly? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another question, kind of coming off the other one.
Yeah.
So quite often I've seen like foreign businesses that go into China, apart from certain fields like education and stuff like that, where they think that the local systems are not so great. Is there a stigma for foreign companies compared to if there's a local competitor in China? Kind of looking at like eBay versus Alibaba and their big battle, which basically Jack Ma drove them into the ground.
Especially among investors. So most VCs, rule of thumb, they won't invest in international founders, ever. It does not happen very often. So our companies actually go profitable because they can't raise money except for like little tiny angel rounds. And a little tiny angel round is like maybe 250, 500, 750 US. So that's small for China. Most Chinese companies use money as a weapon. And you're seeing that in Southeast Asia right now, where market by market by market, Alibaba and Tencent are buying the number 1 and number 2 in payment and commerce. And it's like game over, done. China controls most of Southeast Asia and South Asia at this point, or they will in the next 2 years. It's a very, very difficult market. It's the most competitive startup market in the world. And that's why so many Chinese companies are coming out, because when they come into other markets, even though they don't understand the international market, it's so much easier to compete than in China. So yes, there definitely is a stigma. And we have a list of investors that are willing to entertain the prospect of potentially investing in an international team in China. It's not a very long list, but we have a list.
My name is Ken also. I have a question actually about the current affairs. If there was a really war of North Korea, so how do you see the trend of the venture capital market in China and also the future development of Chinese enterprises?
Okay, so I live in Shanghai and I don't comment on current affairs. No, joking. I think that if there's a war, we've got other things to worry about. So, yeah, and not going to be good. So I think, just generally speaking, stability is what matters most. In Asia and China, people will go to great lengths to maintain stability. That's the most important thing. Some very strange things would have to happen. And we've got a strange thing in America called Trump, American, and we've got a very strange thing in North Korea. So I'm hopeful, but where China is concerned, it's all about stability. And China so far has been pretty good at stability. It's an uphill battle, but yeah.
Hi, I'm just curious how your perception of China has changed over time. So from before you first went there to now living in Shanghai, what's different in your perception and understanding of China compared to people who know nothing of China, who've never gone to China?
I think the China is sort of like an onion, and the more you peel, then you find another layer, and of course it's an onion, so you're crying all the way. When you first come there, you're like, oh, I kind of understand China, and the more time you spend there, you understand that you know nothing. So I don't really have a clue. We track a lot of data. So we have a sense of what our users are doing with our platforms and products. But I don't pretend to be a China expert. I don't think there's such a thing.
So from a moving away from a rational perspective, do you love China?
I enjoy being there. Yeah, I think China is a lot of fun. You can do things that do you guys have Cartoon Network here? It's a TV channel. Yeah. So like, while I was doing a job, I think it was at SoftBank at the time, I licensed personally Cartoon Network for China. Now, like as a side thing, just for fun. Now it took 1.5 years of my life, and then I figured out after I did it, now I know why it was so easy. There's no way to make money on this piece of shit. But then I learned, lean startup. You figure out whether you can make money off of it by pirating it, and then you license it. But usually you can't be a partner in a fund, do 2 startups, and license Cartoon Network at the same time in most places. So if you have a certain type of personality, somewhere between a little bit crazy and driven, you can do well there. So it's just so I really enjoy it. I love China. I mean, I love lots of parts of China. There's lots of parts I'm not particularly fond of.
Sounding a lot like love.
Yeah, I don't like the air very much. Yeah.
So just a question, what are the thought process when you come to making decisions? Or, you say you iterate every single day, every 2 days, right? And what's your normal day like when it comes to just changing? Because changing from week, like here normally takes weeks or months to execute something. How do you normally do it so fast, so fast?
I mean, our program is not rocket science. It's mostly like we put you in a pressure cooker and we say, there's demo day, execute. Okay, you want to raise money? I mean, a lot of our companies do only 3 or 4x growth, but we have companies that have done like 40x revenue growth in 3 months. And it's not magic, it's just trying shit. You just try. And so you can do it without us. Now there's some things that you probably can't do without us, like we help navigate a lot of legal things. We know where the invisible line is. We can save 6 months to a year for a lot of companies. in terms of just discovery of basic stuff. Well, it seems basic to us, but it doesn't seem basic to other people. So we can help with the navigation. But in terms of the process, there's a book called Lean Startup. It's okay. I actually recommend Lean Startup Machine, where you actually do 54 hours and actually try it. And it's just discipline. I mean, if you work like 18, 20 hours a day for 6-7 days a week, you can do 3 to 5 experiments a week.
And you say you collect data, right? Like, is it presumably everything is just on internet data or hard data as well? And how much know we collect and what's your sample size to determine is a good set of data?
I mean, so we talk to people, we do some surveys and stuff like that, but most of our companies have products, right? And we put the products in the hands of people, and then we kind of watch what they do with it. So the sample size is what we can get. So it's just try lots of things. And our whole process is we sit there and say, okay, what are your experiments of the week? And you have like 5 to 10. And then not all of them end up getting done, but it's pretty simple. What's the experiment? There's an assumption, right? You're making an assumption. What's the experiment, and what you think is the outcome? And then we just compare every week. What happened to what you thought would happen, and what's your next set of experiments?
So the size of the data doesn't really matter. It's just what
bigger is better.
Yeah.
But again, we're not made of money. So so it's not huge sample sizes. For mocks, we usually start off with 10,000 users, and then a lot of them like bounce, and then we have this auto update feature, and if you don't update, the app goes away. So you either update or you're gone. And if we run out of users, we get another 10,000, and that's market by market by market. It's just it's a minimum campaign size, is why it's 10,000.
All right.
Yeah.
How do you normally get your initial 10,000 users?
We spam them. It's our we control the operating system in the phone. It's a very convenient thing to have. So, and people in Southeast Asia and South Asia are used to seeing pop-ups all the time. It would annoy all of you, but it's a fact of life for people who live in markets that are not like here. So yeah, we put pop-ups, notifications. You can't get rid of this. We're in your operating system.
And it's usually from like, I presume, household app there, and then you just spam them by that. Is that what it is?
It's our like a MIUI. It's an Android ROM.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's our operating system.
All right.
We forked Android, but we also have the apps too, and we track everything. I think most of the stuff we do might be illegal here, but we don't collect PII, so there's no personally identifiable information. But we don't need it because we can touch you. We know where you live. We know where you work. We know how you get to work. We know where you're on a bicycle, a train, a bus, whether you drive. We know how many times a week you drink Starbucks, or if you don't drink Starbucks. We know whether you go to Dimox. Nobody in our markets go to the bookstores. There are no bookstores. But anyway, we know a lot of things about you. We know what your tastes are in games, which is what really matters. We don't really care about your musical taste. We know a lot of things, and he or she who has the most data wins.
So, are there any other global kind of venture groups or accelerators besides yours? I know there's Follow the Seed, but other than them, is there anybody else that's emerged in the last 2 years?
So there's 4 or 5 global accelerator groups that have funds. Techstars, which is like city. More actually now it's mostly like corporate. And then there's 500, which is invest around the world, but accelerators are mostly just in the Valley. And then there's YC, which is the Valley. And then there's us. And we're a little bit unique because it's SOSV, Sean O'Sullivan. He basically cornerstoned our fund. Like normal VCs, LPs, like the place that VCs are general partners. I'm a general partner, and VCs get money from limited partners, and no limited partner in their right mind would probably bet on us until we're proven. Now we are proven now. We have a 36% net realized IRR over 18 years. And for the accelerator investments that we started basically from the 2012 timeframe, on paper we're doing very, very well. So now it's safer for them to come and back us. But for this current fund, which is basically our second fund, Sean put up 100 million of the 150 million that we're investing. So it's very difficult for there to be other people like us, unless, except for Taizo's son. He is Masayoshi's son, SoftBank's little brother. So he got very lucky, very successful on a company called Gung Ho. And there's a game called Dungeons, I forgot what the name of the game is, but he's worth a good 3-4 billion US. And now he's doing super long-term, impact-driven investing with, and actually his words, he doesn't really care about your business plan. It's just a problem, and people, and let's go figure it out. But there are not that many venture firms in the world that could do things like that. And I think that we're proving it out, so maybe there will be more. But yeah, we're top 5, top 10% performing VC in the world. And we'll probably, one of my companies finally is, probably unicorn level, probably the first in Asia to come out of an accelerator in Asia. And they did it without raising any money. They went profitable during the program.
So you talked about when it may not be good to look for funding and starting up in China. I was just wondering, if you're in a Western country, you spend a year or two when you start up, and you're not flopping, but you're not exactly where you need to be without exit in China or things like that, getting bought out. Is there any difference there?
So if you've got some super amazing hardcore tech, there's a possibility. And you just have to figure out whether the hardcore tech is something that fixes Baidu or Tencent's problems. So the key thing is to look at what their problems are. If they're already doing it, already have it, then it doesn't make any sense. So the first thing that they'll do is they'll do a meeting, and then they'll see what you have, and then they'll throw some engineers against it and see if they can repeat it and get it to about 70% of what you are. And if they can do that, no second meeting. If there's the second meeting, it means they couldn't figure it out in like 4 or 5 days. So then they'll try and suck more information out of you to try it again. But at some point they might buy it, maybe. But right now, most of the big guys are not acquiring outside of China that much, especially, sorry, I'm an internet software person, so all my comments are in internet software, I'm not hardware. But most of the activity right now, international acquisition, is all small investments to get information rights, to understand what the hell is going on. Not acquisitions. It might change, but the acquisitions that will happen will be Southeast Asia, South Asia, the number 1, the number 2, payment, commerce, health, all the different verticals, because China, the big guys understand that they're very bad at operating in these other markets. So they just buy the locals, or they take a majority stake in the local players. So if you happen to be an Indonesian market leader in an area, that's a good position to be in. But if you're kind of like looking to sort of acquire, or it's not taking off, it's not going down, I think there's easier places to sell. Again, I'm not really an M&A guy, but that's my opinion. Yep.
Hi.
Yeah. Hey.
I just have a question for you. Just now you mentioned that you pay extreme attention to execution, to data. Right? You use the example of the mobile phone wallpaper as an example to check how many downloads are there, wallpaper. So you pay extreme attention to data. I'm just wondering, would like to know your thoughts on strategy and execution.
because, for example, Secure China has already invested in around 30 companies who are working on the artificial intelligence. So they choose a company that is doing something in the future, right? And then they select which company can do the things, can really execute. So it's a kind of relationship between strategy and execution. So, but you mentioned you play a lot of details on the execution. But I just want to present the real thoughts between how you choose a company.
Yeah, so that wallpaper company is not for China. It's for Southeast Asia, India. It's actually an Indian team. That company would get annihilated in China. It does not belong in China. We're not bringing it to China. But I'd say as one of the reasons why we run an accelerator is, it's the problem you're solving, and is it the right team to solve it? So we invest in all the companies that we work with, but then we get to know the executional capability while we live together for 3 months. It's very difficult to have a meeting and tell whether somebody's able to execute. But if you live together for 3 to 6 months, you understand how the team works together as a team, how they approach problems, how they overcome or don't overcome. And then you can, we're very early stage, right? But you can get a sense of the executional capability. And so, yeah, that's, does that answer your question, or is it a little bit different?
Do you intentionally choose which industry or which company, whether it's a high-class company or whether it's just a industry company that executes very well?
Yeah, so doing the cross-border thing, the entrepreneurs are generally going to be poor at execution because they're not from the market. So the local players are always going to be able to generally out execute the international player. So there has to be something else that gives that international player a special advantage, and it's not going to be money, and it might not be execution. But yeah, so I'd say we look for that unfair advantage, and we look, for the team. We also look for the problem. Those 3 things. It's a little bit different than traditional VC. Yeah.
I agree with you. Execution across the border is really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where the barrier is.
We invest in cockroaches. You step on them, and they get up and keep on going. So a lot of times starting up in China is mostly about not giving up. Now, sometimes you should give up. One of my companies, a guy didn't give up for 2 years. He should have given up 2 years previously, but whatever. But it's really, for a lot of the companies that I have that are successful, they're successful not because of any thing other than they didn't give up. They smash their head against the wall for 10 years. It takes 10 to 12 years to do this, by the way. And then their head was harder than the wall.
Hi, William. Just kind of one question. I think you just mentioned before about you have to take more advantage to China in some area. So one area you mentioned is the fintech. So I just wanted you to give us more details about this area.
Okay, so China's really far ahead in P2P. It's like 80-something%. Numbers in China are always a little bit difficult, but a lot of the world's P2P lending is done in China. But there are some other areas where there are difficulties, like cross-border remittance. Actually, there's a couple companies that have been pretty successful at cross-border remittance, sending money from one country to another country using cryptocurrency and swaps. Okay, I invested in 2 companies because I like the space. Unfortunately, I didn't get the right ones. But anyway, but it's a problem. A lot of people have this problem. It's somewhat gray area. They're small. Who cares about the law, right? So these are this type of solving a problem is what's key. Another problem that you have is that people in China like buying real estate. You're in Australia. You probably have experienced this. there's a lot of real estate investment down here. So the issue is that for middle class, white collar people, they might have an apartment in Shanghai. The apartment costs 1.5 million US. Real estate in China is expensive. They have about 300,000 US in cash. They cannot buy another apartment in Shanghai. So they also want to diversify a little bit. So we have a company that uses data, didn't get any sleep last night, but qualitative, quantitative database curated of international new residential developments for investment with a buy button. 45 cities around the world. And we're going after places where, like Montreal, not super popular, but the currency is down, decent rental, and these people will never ever visit that place, but they need to trust that they're getting not just a good deal, but they're picking a good development. So it solves a problem, and it's actually not that hard to get money out of China because this is a new development. So a $200,000 apartment or whatever, it's a $40,000 remittances in the first year, and most people can handle that, right? You get 50,000, your mom gets 50,000, your dad gets 50,000. That's 150,000. You're done. So it's fintech, it's prop tech, and it's actually pretty amazing because now you can do REITs, and there's all these Airbnb management companies, so you can do a pretty decent rental yield off the back of it. And so the question is, will Chinese people buy a new property development based on data without ever visiting it or even going to that city? And we got lucky, yeah, they are. You know, the first month they sold 5 apartments, $1 million. Second month, 3.2 million US. Third month, 5 million US. You know, they're doing pretty well. So that's like prop tech, and those types of opportunities are interesting to us. The unicorn thing that we have is a derivatives trading platform for any financial product in the world. So we can do a derivative of anything. But instead of loading your account with renminbi or rubles or dollars or rupees, you put your money into the account with Bitcoin. So we do not touch currency, therefore we do not touch the law. Yeah, and the major problem what we're solving right now is currency trading. Currency trading is very popular in Australia, right? But there's a lot of scandal, there's a lot of regulation, I don't know, I didn't really read about it, but that's what people told me. And so you're getting less leverage and there's restrictions. So if you were trading $1 million US and 70 times leverage before, now they're only letting you do 250K at 20 times leverage. So, you know, for every dollar you can only bet $20 instead of $70 before. So what we are doing is offering unlimited trading volume and 100x leverage. And that thing is doing extremely well. Like really well.
Final question?
I do want to ask a hardware question.
I'll try. I'm not the hardware guy, but I'll do my best.
I'm just wondering if you've ever seen examples of startups doing well in partnerships with manufacturers in China.
I mean, partnership like, okay. So, again, this is not my area, but usually the problem that my friends encounter that do hardware is they pick the wrong partner, like Foxconn, okay? Foxconn is really good at making very many things perfectly. They are not so good at making 2 things fast, you know, like prototyping or small batch. So you need to pick a partner that knows what they're doing. The next thing is that a lot of partners take advantage of foreigners. So you go to Shenzhen and I don't know, they take you out partying, and they're like, yeah, we can do that. And then like a year later, and you're way behind schedule, and you're paying double what you thought you were going to pay, and it's a total mess. I think those are I mean, most people know about these problems. So when it just depends on who you're partnering with. When I'm on an advisory board of something called Platform 88, and they They don't take equity. You pay them money, and they build the stuff, and they deliver it, and it's generally on time, and it's not going to be the cheapest stuff ever, but it actually generally shows up mostly on time and mostly within the cost. That's a partnership that can probably work. Yeah, so I don't know if I can introduce you to the Hacks guys. They can probably help you a lot better than I can. Just think about this. Try and find examples of these types of partnerships that have worked. And then if somebody has done it before, maybe you can do it. I'm not aware of lots of examples of partnerships with hardware manufacturers in Shenzhen that have worked. But again, I'm not in that market anymore.
So thank you very much, William. We've covered a lot of topics, gone through a lot of areas. As a final kind of question to you, a lot of people in the audience will probably still be very interested in exploring China. Do you have some tips on a book, a podcast, a blog, an author that you would recommend so that before they actually go to China, it would be a good resource to keep up to date with what's going on?
So our partners here at Haymarket have an awesome podcast. I can highly recommend it. Actually, we have also a podcast. We stopped doing it about 9 months ago because Mox got in the way. Mox definitely got in the way. But it features a lot of our mentors, and so you can check it out. It's called China Startup Pulse. And then if you want general China, there's the Sinica podcast. Sinica blog. There's, what's the SubChina one? Anyway, there's one on SubChina with Kaiser, and that one's called, there's Cynicism and Sinica. I think Sinica is the podcast, and Cynicism is the blog. They're not necessarily tech focused, but if you want to understand what's going on with China, you hit those two things, you're probably going to be good. They're run by friends of mine, and they all fucked off back to America, and I'm still in China. So there's very few of us left. They're very quite active, and Kaiser, Bill Bishop, Mark, Jeremy Goldcorn, they're awesome China watchers. Our podcast was okay. It was maybe a little bit too light, less on detail, but it's short enough, it was good. I recently started to pull some other ones. I don't really read that often anymore, some of the startup books I found useful, but I actually really recommend doing a lean startup machine if you can go find one. If you haven't done one before, I highly recommend that. Much better than the book, because you actually get to do it. And I brought my daughter through it, and when she was 8, and she's her net income, she's doing 60 US a week in net income. Selling candy to ballerinas. I know, it's so bad, but yeah. Lean startup machine or lean startup training is awesome.
Great, thank you so much, William. Everyone, please join me in thanking William.